Hello, young voters. Welcome back to another installment of Reform or Revolution with
Me, Sarah. Hi, guys.
and today we're going to be discussing Chapter 8, Conquest of Political Power. Similar length chapter to the last one. If you haven't watched the last couple of videos, you're probably going to be pretty confused, so probably go watch those. There's a playlist link in the description. And yeah, all right. Assuming that you have watched and hopefully read, because there's also a link to the text that you can get, because you should probably read the chapter, because what we may say, we might leave out stuff or misinterpret stuff, so we wouldn't want you or your interpretation of the text to be muddied by our reasoning. So please go ahead and read that, and then once you come back to it, yeah, we'll go ahead and start. So Sarah, just nod your, like, give me a wave if you want to say something. All right, so yeah, so Rosa starts off the chapter basically by doing more slights at Bernstein. And if you watched the last video, you'll know that we complained that she was, taking a lot of slights at Bernstein, a lot of shots at him, and not backing up her positions. But I feel like she did a better job in this chapter. Not the best, but a much better job in this chapter. So she starts off by saying Bernstein doesn't understand revolution as well. He doesn't really understand what revolution is as a historic force. The reason, just as a, aside, is that, Marxists, they talk a lot about history because their views are sort of founded in dialectical materialism and an analysis of history through class struggle. And this is what, Marx talked about a lot. He analyzed history through these views and sort of formed the idea of dialectical materialism, which is in opposition to utopian socialists of previous decades. So those were sort of the precursors to what we now more know as socialists, or whether the utopian socialists were more utopian, as the name suggests. Marx was more based in laws of like humanity and human nature and economics and history. So that's why they talk about history so much. So she gives a lot of historical examples of different revolutions, and she explains how it's a different process than reform, and certain things can only be accomplished through revolution. She doesn't elaborate a whole lot, but she elaborates later on in the chapter, so I'll forgive her for starting off with a criticism of Bernstein and then not elaborating too much. So she goes on to say that reform necessitates the improvement of the previous system. Therefore, you cannot reform out of capitalism. You can only improve it. Through revolution, society can be changed entirely. Otherwise, through reform, you're just improving the old society's base. You can't really change much through reform, is what she's saying. Therefore, she's saying that no socialist who advocates for reform is a real socialist, as socialists must want to overthrow the capitalist system and replace it with something new. And she's saying, you can't reform out of capitalism. It's just not possible. So therefore, you should advocate for some sort of revolution, because in order to be a socialist, you have to, say that you want to overthrow capitalism. And this idea of who are the real socialists have really gone on throughout history. If you're more in tune with the online left, you can think of people calling Bosch not a real socialist, or people calling Destiny not a real leftist, etc. So there's a lot of argumentation about who is the real socialist. But I'll digress from there because I don't want to make the video too long. So yeah, Sarah, just give me a nod when you have a note on anything.
Well, okay, so I do have one thing, or I have two things, but so in the beginning, she quotes Bernstein saying that, like in history, the development is the action of intelligence when it comes to reform, and revolution is like feeling, and she kind of doesn't agree with it. She's kind of just like being like talking about how Bernstein's being like very derogatory against people who believe in revolution and how it's not intelligent. But then later on, she just like is very hypocritical with that, because she talks about how revolution does not choose the tranquil, they take a stand. and how it has basically nothing to do with intelligence. It's more about having the feeling and motivation to do such a big and hard event, such as having a revolution. So that kind of annoyed me. And then also just like in the points of reform and how it just like doesn't work and how instead it benefits capitalist society. She talked about how she made this like a quote about like if a guy grabs someone at the collar, he ends up finding out that there's no collar in the first place. That's like with reform. You can't reform laws that don't exist. So in order to reform society, you can't do it through like legislation because it's like society isn't ingrained in these laws. It's also just like in general things that need to change, and that can only happen with a revolution.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the the points she makes. And I believe in this sort of section, she sort of does explain a little bit and does provide some a decent logic. Not the best, but because you have to sort of buy into a little bit of what she's saying to get the rest of the logic. But she does provide some logic that I can't really restate in a just as good as a way. You should just probably read the book at that point. Otherwise, I'd just be quoting her. Um, but yeah, so she does give some logic there. But yeah, so the what Sarah was talking about, that's my next note. She's basically saying that no law in the world exists that can implement socialism under a capitalist government. There can be no law that gives worker control of means of production without overthrowing capitalism. There must be a revolution to change the system. To that, I would say, when you do revolutions, what do? You implement new laws. You're just changing the whole government. You can do I mean, I guess, well, here. I guess when we think about revolution, we usually think about violent revolution. Obviously, a lot of people are not going to give up the the capitalist system without spilling blood. So I guess that's what we think about it. But I was about to just say we could do like a peaceful political revolution in which like just socialists are voted into government, and then they do pass laws that like give over control of the means of production, which is like what happens in even in violent revolutions. They take control of the government. They start this new government. They say, okay, now we're the real government. You will obey by our laws, and then they have to write some sort of law to give worker control of the means of production. You can't just seize the production by force, the means of production by force, and then just like say, okay, this is ours now. You have to have some sort of government or law or like society or government or law backing it up. Otherwise, you're eventually just going to lose it because somebody else is going to take it again, or whoever owned the factory is going to take it back. So there has to be some sort of mandate, and I feel like this is sort of a at first it's a statement that makes sense surface level, and then when you really think about it, like, no, yes, we can write laws to give control of the means of production. So
But isn't that just reform? Like, isn't it just like voting socialists into office and then having them create laws? That's just like the definition of reform, is it not?
yeah, that's reform. That's what she's basically arguing against this whole time. So I guess my criticism of her is just basically saying, no, what you're arguing against is wrong, and here's my view, which is what we've been criticizing her for. But um
But like with that, she had one statement saying that every legal constitution was birthed from revolution. Is that true?
I mean, depends how you define it. um I mean, you could say like political revolution, where you just people are voted into office, but like I guess like a lot of a lot of the more radical constitutions, yeah, but like I don't know. It depends how you define constitution. It depends how you define revolution. I just
That's
this is a weird like semantics game versus like an idea of like this is a weird like phrasing thing. I feel like where she's saying like you can't reform into like you can't reform into revolution, because if you reform enough, then it becomes like a peaceful political revolution, which she establishes earlier, which is impossible due to like capitalists being in the government. But for the sake of ignoring that portion, um, if it becomes too dramatic of a change, then it becomes a revolution, or it can be a violent revolution, but they have to change the laws anyways. So I don't know. The lines between reform and revolution are kind of blurred and don't really make sense.
I think
And
in my head, like the difference is like reform is like obviously just changing laws, and revolution is getting rid of all past laws and just remaking laws.
Yeah, but isn't that sort of reform? Like
You're not, it's not like a clean slate. Like reform is like taking laws one by one and changing them. A revolution is we're starting over.
okay, but like once you have the revolution, right? Then and you like okay, like you know how laws are made in I don't know if you've ever I think you've read a law. I think we talked about one. Well, okay, all right. I just move past that. So like at the bottom it says like all laws in contradiction to this are declared null and void, and that's like on every law. That's just the thing that they put because you can't have two laws in contradiction. So like, isn't the act of writing a new law always erasing the old? And isn't a revolution just writing a whole lot of laws at once? In that sense, like obviously a revolution is where there's if it's violent, obviously there's like people taking control and blood being spilled, but like I feel like the revolution in itself is only the act of seizing political power, but everything you do after that is technically, I feel like, reform. Um, I mean, and like, at what point does the revolution end? Is it perpetual revolution, as the idea that took hold in after the formation of the Soviets, in what became Soviet Russia? Was that a perpetual revolution, or at what point did the revolution stop and the reforms start? So what would you say to that?
I don't know. I guess like in my head, like revolution is like it stops when they make the base laws. Like okay, for like the American Revolution, it stopped with like the Constitution, and then
Okay, so like all the
they
amendments aren't part of it.
yeah, and then like they just reform was when they were like making more laws later on. I
Okay,
guess.
so like revolution is a fairly short period then.
Yeah, depends on if it's like bloody or if it's just a political. But I don't know. I guess.
Well, they didn't they sign the Constitution before the war ended?
Did they?
Um, actually
What?
no. Well, not no, I don't know. Well, no, they did because they created the Constitution and then they named George Washington the president, right? And leader of the Continental Army.
But they, I mean, yeah, I guess. But it wasn't like because the revolution didn't actually end. It was just them like creating a leader
Well,
for the.
yeah, but like, so they write their laws. So is that the end of the revolution, or is the revolution the act of securing your government in opposition to whatever forces
I guess
oppose
the
you?
securing, but like when I meant like when they first write their laws, that's just kind of like everything after that law wise is reform.
Mhm.
You have their base is for government.
Hmm. Well, viewers, that I guess that's a question for you. But like, as it just played out with me and Sarah, I feel like this is much more of a semantics game, and none of it really matters. Like, what technically means reform and what technically means revolution. I feel like the fact that like I can even say that kind of like destroys her whole argument. Like it's very cemented in ideas that you have to accept, and if you don't, the argument is like pretty much null and void at a lot of points, and that's what I don't like about this so much. At least her writing style and her argumentative style. But
She's so annoying. I'm annoyed. She was fine in the beginning, and now I don't like her.
mm-hmm. All right, well, moving on from that, because Sarah, do you know what time we started recording at?
Nope.
Okay, I always forget to do this, so hopefully this won't be too long. So the next note that I have, she says, additionally, any reform we see in previous pre-capitalist society. So this is sort of a tangent she delivers, but to sort of this is like an example of her like uh, responding to counter arguments before they're written, which I do like, because she doesn't do a whole lot of that. So she says, and additionally, any reform we see in a previous pre-capitalist society only exists because under those systems, social mobility may have been possible. However, social mobility under capitalism is not possible. Only capitalists can be capitalists. A socialist cannot be capitalist. And if he cannot be capitalist, then he cannot run the government, which she established earlier on. So, I mean, does that make sense? Like how I said it, like if even if you consider yourself a socialist, if you become rich, then you must be a capitalist. Like, so yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like you have to act on capitalist goals. Um, and that sort of brings in the modern idea of like, can you be a socialist while still being wealthy? Which I think yes. Like I don't think the criticism of like Bernie, for example, is fair. Like like, oh, he has 2 houses, then he can't advocate for the working class.
Yeah, but he was the working class like before he was really wealthy though, right?
Hmm.
So he has like experience. I think you can be, but like you're also actively like contributing to capitalist society in such a great deal. Like it's different than just like, I bought an iPhone, so like how can
Hmm.
I be a socialist? It's like if you were like, I don't know, the head of Google, you're making all this money, like are
Yeah.
you really a socialist?
But what if you take those funds and then you use them to, like, I don't know, run for office and then implement like socialist changes?
Then I think that's fine.
Hmm.
But it
So
just
like,
depends on what you use your money for, I
okay.
guess.
So I guess like, and does then just by the means like, can you do worker exploitation to get money to end worker exploitation?
Why, if you really wanted to end worker exploitation, why are you exploiting your workers?
So that you get the money, so that you can like get into a position of power where you can stop the exploitation of workers.
I don't think that's good.
Well, it's not like, when I say exploiting your workers, I mean like literally not paying them every single cent of profit you make. Like that idea of exploitation. Like
Oh,
you pay them
that's
$20 an hour and they have
exploiting
plenty
their
of benefits,
workers.
but like you're not giving them all your profits, because like that's like Marx's idea of like worker exploitation is that.
Yeah, but by that standard, everyone is exploiting their workers.
Yes.
So I don't know.
Well, I don't want to get into this too much because that's like a whole like Marx concept, and yeah, I'm trying to keep the video short, but yeah, well, we'll end there. So yeah, so I think I jump ahead a little bit here by like 8 minutes. So Sarah, if you have anything in the middle of this, let me know. So here she basically establishes later on in the chapter that Bernstein doesn't have an understanding of Marx and Engels. She just criticizes him for not understanding Marx and Engels, and then quotes Marx and Engels to provide like a point opposite of that.
Which we don't care about. Stop, like, bashing Bernstein. That's not what we're here for.
Well, I mean, like at the you gotta consider at the time this was an essay like rebuking Bernstein and trying to say Bernstein's ideas are wrong. Don't follow him. Like she was sort of vying for control of like the party. So she's trying to get the socialists to agree with her and stopping them from agreeing with Bernstein. So she's really does have to go after him.
Yeah, but like it's not in the way that's like civil. Like she's just being like he's stupid and this is why, instead of like actually refuting specific details like that he did. And if she did do specific details, it's like so minuscule and like it doesn't even matter. It's probably just like he just like wrote the wrong like word or something.
Mhm.
It just it's too nitpicky. Just choose one. I don't know. Anyways, sorry.
No problem. All right. So yeah. So yeah, she's saying Bernstein doesn't understand, and Bernstein at least does not, in her mind, make a plan for a society in which the working class takes power. It only advocates for reformism under a capitalist system, and if you're only advocating for reformism, then that means that once you're in power, you have no idea what to do. Um, but I think my question is that if earlier she keeps talking about how workers cannot take power in a reformist society, that here she's implying that workers can take power, or at least she's trying to use Bernstein's argument against him. So if that's the case, then never mind. But if it is the case that she generally believes that this is a flaw in Bernstein's argument because workers can take power but also simultaneously cannot, then she has messed up logic, and um, she should have straightened that out. Because earlier she keeps talking about how you can't take power because it's a capitalist government and they'll always stop worker movements from succeeding. Um, and now she's saying like, what if they did succeed? Then Bernstein isn't planning properly for that. So I don't know. Maybe it just feels like she's taking more cheap shots at Bernstein
Yeah.
at the expense of her argument. So yeah.
I think it's just more of like a hypothetical instead of her like actually being like, well, it could happen. I think it's just being like, yeah, but like you've gotten this far and you don't have a plan for after you take power. Like, what are you gonna do? I'm
I
not sure
guess.
if you're like being serious.
Okay. Do you have anything before that? Because I only have a couple more notes, 2 more notes here.
Nope.
Okay. All right. And here, this is just in passing. She was talking about something completely different, but she mentions the Paris Commune, which is and she admits that it was a reform measure. She says it was a lucky thing that just happened after the French Revolution. That they there was new government, they didn't really know what to do, so they the social utopian socialists came along and said, I'd like to make a commune, and they allowed them to make a commune. And this is proof that reformism can lead to socialism, where you had a government and they wrote some laws and then they had a commune. So what gives? I mean, even the fact that she mentions this, I feel like is sort of invalidating her argument. And I'm pretty sure historically she was at least happy with the Paris Commune. She was, she used it as an example to draw on like how you should do certain things. So it seems a little hypocritical that, I mean, yes, technically a revolution was required in order to give people the power to make this reform, but like it wasn't essential that there was a revolution. It was just essential that there were people in power willing to make a commune. Which I guess she kind of deflects on earlier by saying you can't get in power if you're a socialist. But her logic for that is like so sorely in need of some sort of backing up and expansion that it's hard for me to take that argument seriously as like a shutdown to like every other counter argument.
Yeah. I don't even know why she brought that up, because it's just ruining her entire argument.
Yeah. She should have considered that 200 years later,
Idiot.
two high schoolers would be making a YouTube video on her book. Why didn't you plan for this, Rosa? Huh?
She's so good at seeing the future. How did she not see this happening?
Yeah, exactly.
Rude.
All right. So it's my final note. So if you have anything else to share, Sarah, this would be the time.
Nope.
No?
You said everything I have.
Okay, well then you should say it first then next time. All right. All right. So her final point basically is this. Socialists believe that a revolution must happen spontaneously, and that it will happen, and it will happen several times, as capitalist nations will seek to overthrow it, or it will fall to its own accord. Basically, this is not universally held belief, but a fairly common belief that revolution might not succeed every time. It takes a long time, just as capitalism took a long time to come into fruition and required multiple revolutions. So does socialism. So, sorry. Therefore, sorry, I lost my place. Oh yeah. Therefore, when Bernstein says there would be a revolution at some point, but now is not the time, and that we shouldn't do it prematurely, this is some sort of fallacy, as revolutions must be premature in order for them to succeed, and can't just be continuously some point in the future. There's never is the perfect time for revolution, is basically what she's saying. So for Bernstein to suggest that there is a right time to do revolution, he is wrong, and that doesn't really exist in the sort of socialist timeline. Therefore, basically what he's advocating for is basically a revolution that doesn't exist and will never happen and will never be under the right conditions to happen. So therefore, by Rosa's logic, Bernstein is not able to advocate for revolution at all. So this is just another angle at which he approaches to, say that Bernstein isn't really a real socialist because he doesn't really advocate for revolution. Or, I mean, he does technically in his mind, but he, if things were to play out, then it would cause revolution to not happen. So, yeah.
I don't know if I agree with the fact that there's no perfect time for revolution, because one of the things that is taught universally is that revolution begins with a trigger event, and that makes people rally and makes people motivated. And if, like they said earlier, revolution is a feeling instead of intelligence, it's just emotion, then you would kind of need that trigger event to make it work well. No one's going to rally behind you if they don't have any emotion.
Well, yeah, but a trigger event is spontaneous. It's not planned.
Yeah.
So isn't that sort of in support of what Rosa's saying? There can't be a perfect time. You're just gonna have to ride the wave when it comes.
Yeah, but I guess I was just interpreting it wrong, because in my head she was just being we don't have to wait until that. But okay, I don't know. In my head, the perfect event is when the trigger event happens. That's when it's perfect.
Okay. Well, I think what Bernstein was saying was that we have to wait until everything is perfect, where there just can be everything goes right, and the stars align and just everything is like will 100% succeed for sure. And yeah, so that's not a situation in which any that's not a real situation, is what Rose is saying. And this is general life advice. Never wait for the perfect opportunity because it won't come. But yeah, so like I think what she's trying to say is like, if there's a trigger event or there's something that happens that there's a good chance that revolution happens, you're just gonna have to ride the wave and take it. And she's saying that Bernstein is like sort of saying like, hey, like no, don't ride this wave. Let's wait for an even bigger wave. And then when that bigger wave comes, he says, no, let's wait for a bigger wave. And that wave never really comes because he keeps readjusting his sights.
Okay, I just misinterpreted it.
Okay. At least that was my interpretation. So I don't know.
I think we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
There, good.
Yeah. Any final comments?
No.
All right. Well, I don't want to drag this out too much, so make sure if you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. If you dislike the video, you know what to do. Please comment on anything, and we'll respond to you. Any commentary you had on our commentary, or anything that we didn't notice, or any rhetorical questions that we posed, if you want to answer them, or just questions, not rhetorical questions, because then you wouldn't be able to answer them. So yeah, and then click on Sarah's page and my page and our website and our Discord and our Instagram and everything else.
Make sure to dislike this video and unsubscribe. And yeah.
Yeah, make sure to unsubscribe as well.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody.